we built a tier list of the easiest characters to play in Street Fighter V. If you're looking for the simplest route to go for wins, we've got a breakdown of where to look and who to play. Also, if you're trying to avoid characters who are very difficult to learn, we cover all 45 cast members here today and highlight which ones are more challenging than the rest. All right, John, I want to do now a tier list of the easiest characters to play in Street Fighter V. And this is a multifaceted thing. So if you basically just want to pick up a character and, mash your face on the joystick, have some fun, do some good stuff, this is an easy way of basically going about it, right? If you don't want to invest years of your life into playing a game, we'll have a few characters that you should probably avoid. So getting into it right now, this is sorted alphabetically in each category. Mash your face on the joystick easy characters are Balrog, Cammy, M. Bison, and Nikali. These are great characters to start out with if you're trying to learn fighting games for the first time. Unfortunately, they also work at the highest levels of play. Thankfully, most of them were nerfed in the most recent patch, but still, it's kind of ridiculous how easy of a time these characters have compared to the rest of the cast, especially in this game where that's a really big deal. You play these characters basically to play checkers while your opponent is forced to play chess. Heck yeah.
Well, speaking of M. Bison and mashing, can you guys mash Psycho Crush on that like button? And while you're there, shoot us a comment. Let us know if you agree with this list, or rather, who you think is going to be, and then whether you agreed by the end of it. And then also, if you could subscribe, we would really appreciate it.
Spoilers, no one agrees with my list. But yes, going on next, we have the basic characters. We've got Abigail, Alex, Birdie, E. Honda, Ed, Falk, Kin, Laura, Nash, Armika, Rashid, Sakura, Zangief. The set of fighters are not very hard to play, as they typically rely on the same setups and approaches. And once you get those down, there isn't much else you need to learn. Unlike the characters in the previous category, however, there is depth beyond the surface level, which is nice, in the form of some advanced combos and tricks. They have some stuff that you can pick up and do that's like, okay, hey, if you really want to take them to another level, they've got it. So, however, they don't ever have to tap into those advanced things to be strong. You just need to learn their core stuff, which can take a bit of time, usually about a week or two, and then you'll have almost everything down you need to be fairly good with them. Not saying that, everyone's going to play this, for 2 weeks and be, ultimate grandmaster with, Kin with that. I'm just saying that their core setups or their core stuff that you need to learn to be competent with them, you can usually get down in about a week or so.
This might be helpful in kind of figuring out, because you've already alluded to, like, this doesn't necessarily apply to, you have to be within a certain sort of skill window or understanding window of the game. In a similar conversation to when you're talking about a tier list, it really applies to when you're playing at the highest level. As understanding goes down, obviously, a lower tier character can more easily beat a high tier character because of the player skill and such. But do you have sort of like a window of like where this necessarily applies?
It's applicable mostly for people who are kind of starting out, looking for a new main, other things like that. Like certainly not at a pro level, because the pros know all this stuff.
Like maybe with like ranked online, like where would you say like?
Oh yeah, like silver, gold, somewhere around there. Anything below, at or below those ranks should be fine with this list. So moving on now, we have the average characters. These are the characters who are, just middle of the pack. That would be Akira, Blanca, Cody, Kage, Colleen, Luke, Ryu, and Urien. For Street Fighter V, these characters have an average amount of execution and technical ability required. Not only do you need to be able to execute your combos, but your awareness of spacing and timing are also actually important now. If you play Bison or Balrog before, you don't need to have awareness of anything. You just do crap and you're good to go. But these characters actually have to factor that stuff in there. These characters take about a couple weeks to get competent with them, and then you need to have understanding of your matchups and other stuff like that. Some people will reach their max potential with these fighters after like a year or two of practice. Like they're average, and I know Street Fighter V has like a bit of a reputation for not being that execution heavy. You pretty much pick a character from this list beyond, and you're going to have an experience there where it's like, okay, there's depth and complexity here that people take for granted. Kind of a lot of people pick characters from the easy or basic list and think like the game is just stone cold easy to play and all that kind of stuff. And sure, you play those characters and you're going to have a much easier time. But anyone here from the average and beyond list, you're going to have a much more intense time playing the game. I wouldn't call these particular characters hard to play, but they are definitely more challenging than the first two sets of characters.
It's interesting that Luke's here. I don't disagree, but I think that people have various ways of looking at Luke because, and he's designed as such, right? Because he's got those sort of execution-based combo extenders if you learn the timing and such, but he doesn't necessarily need to resort to those to get, just basic stuff down. So I would imagine that Luke might also be a character that could jump between two different, rankings depending on how you approach him. And the fact that Capcom has designed him, and maybe others, but certainly him, to be more versatile in this, I think is a really good look. Maybe kind of scary and dangerous because, who knows what sort of Pandora's boxes you might open when you're trying to do that kind of a thing. But if successful, and it seems like they're decently so, that's, I think, a really good thing, and I would hope more characters would have that in the future too.
Yeah, if you took out Luke's just frame timing and stuff, he would definitely be in the easy or even basic category. He would definitely fall down, but he generally has to use that stuff to get most of his Oki setups and other things. So that's why I have him in the average category. He does take a good bit to use if you want to really kind of not maybe maximize his potential, but really unlock his potential. That's how I would say.
Yeah.
So. Moving on now, we have the technical characters, and there is a solid step up here with these fighters compared to the rest of the cast that we previously covered. You're likely looking at a month or more of time before you can play them competently. Making a single mistake in Street Fighter V can actually cost you the entire game, and making that error mid-combo when you should be winning is a really disheartening experience. Get used to that happening here with these characters, and that would be Akuma, Chun-Li, Dan, Fong, Ibuki, Juri, G, Gil, Guile, Karen, Lucia, Sagat, Seth, and Vega. Because you drop something with these and you're on your back and then you're dead. And it's someone like Vega has all the stance cancels and whatnot that you have to get into. So not only do you have to be in the right stance to initiate the combo, you need to also change your stance and mid-stance and mid-combo. You've got to learn to juggle a lot, right? So if you're a beginning player, you need to think twice about picking a fighter from this list if you want to have an easier experience. And basically from this point out, we discuss characters who are going to require extra levels of effort compared to most of the other characters in the game to win with. It is you're starting to get into can you handle this type thing?
Akuma's here. That's interesting. I don't disagree, but can you talk a little bit about why Akuma's in this and not in others?
So the basic thing with Akuma is he has a lot of tools, and you need to understand where to use them at in every situation, and lower life is actually a very big deal in this game. It's a game that's very punishing, and making one of those mistakes here with Akuma, for example, not getting his instant air fireball to come out at the right angle, he actually is fairly negative on those if you don't do it right. Now, I'm not saying it's extremely hard to get it a couple times there in training mode or even in a match and stuff like that, but actually getting it consistent, getting those air fireballs positioned really well. And I'm not talking about V-Trigger 1 air fireballs. I'm talking about normal, air fireballs and whatnot. V-Trigger 1, you can pretty much just spam it and you're pretty much going to get good results from it, right? But he has enough awareness and enough other stuff with his execution that he takes a decent bit of skill to use. And when you don't do that, when you have the lowest life in the game that you are getting punished for. So it's that's a pretty fair trade-off there for Akuma, and that's why I have him on the more technical end of the things. He does have quite a bit he has to juggle.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, next up we have the really difficult characters, and those who are hardcore need not apply. I know Street Fighter V doesn't have that reputation that we're talking about for being a heavy technical game, but if you play one of these characters, there's a lot to wrap your head around, and these would be Dhalsim, Oro, Poison, Rose, and Zeku. Giving your opponent too many juggling pins to keep track of is a big time strategy in Street Fighter V, meaning they can't be ready for every option you're going to throw at them, right? It's okay, you might be ready for a jump, but are you ready for a dash? Or are you ready for me to whiff punish you, or other stuff like that? All the juggling pins that you can throw at someone, that's a really important part of this game. Well, when you play a really difficult character, you're starting off by giving your opponent a few extra juggling pins because of how many options there are for you to explore with these characters. These characters take months, if not a a year or more of steady play to fully wrap your head around them. And that's what we saw actually kind of across the board, even with like Poison and whatnot, with Idom and with Fudo. It took them a while to get that character really up to a high level. And then most of the Dhalsim players weren't wrecking shop until, you know, a year or 2 or 3 or further out with Dhalsim. It took them a while, and he was a launch character. Unfortunately, with Oro and Rose, they've never really caught on. They're kind of really difficult, and most people still consider them to be fairly low tier. So they're kind of in that no man's land that you do not want to be at.
Hard to play and not worth it.
Yeah, that's so you kind of have to really love those characters to kind of play them and stuff. And then Zeku falls in the middle of that as a DLC character. Again, he did not take off right away, but when he did take off, he was winning tournaments and he was doing really well. So 3 out of the 5 characters that fall into this category are actually the high tier, what you want them to be. If you're going to make a really difficult character to play, they generally should be very powerful to offset that because of the human error factors and stuff.
Oh, you know what would be interesting is going back through all of this and seeing where, based on how strong each of these characters are, if they are at least in their difficulty to play where they should be, you know, quote unquote should be. But I like that kind of idea. Yeah. And Zeku's basically you're learning 2 characters, right? Because all of his normals and such, they're different. Even those are different between the forms. Like everything about him is different. The style, the approach, and zoning versus rushdown. I've heard you talk about Rose a million times and such. And I don't know Poison well enough to say that she's that hard to play, but I have heard that kind of a thing. I see those life bars melt from her go-to combos, and I go like, that's really good. And that's my my level of resolution with Poison sometimes.
Yeah, she's very hard to play, and then we have the final character here where you need to grow a third arm and another brain, and that would be Menat. One of the most difficult characters I've ever seen in fighting games to play. Where extremely tight execution, high levels of knowledge, matchup knowledge, and understanding are absolutely required. This was seemingly Capcom's answer to people who said that Street Fighter V wasn't technical at all, launching one of the most difficult characters to play we've ever seen in a Street Fighter game, maybe the most difficult overall. I don't know if there's a character that requires more in a Street Fighter game than Menat, and if there is one, you know, people can shout that out there in the comments and other places. But for my money, I think she's the number one I've ever seen in the Street Fighter game. Very, very crazy, very hard to play.
Yeah, and in such a way that I would argue, and tell me if you agree or not, that if Menat wasn't attractive as a character, and I don't just mean like she's a waifu. She happens to be a waifu, and people like her because of that. But like, there's a version where she's a charismatic male character or whatever. My point is, like, people love the characters, like sort of personality and physical, visual design and such. I think that's been huge in Menat's popularity. And if she wasn't that, and it was all about her gameplay, I think she would be a total dud in this game, because after she was really good in season 3, right? Was it? Yeah, I think in season 3 is when the Menat was like Reign of Terror, and you saw those that could pull it off, the Justin Wongs, the Sakos and such, Infiltration, really doing a number with her. But once she got nerfed, well, she's still really hard to play, but like you say, she's so far up on this technicality list that it just doesn't seem worth it to people. And so, like, they can appreciate her as a character, but they don't appreciate her as a playable character like they did before. And I do think that she's holding on to significance because of who she is, not so much how she plays. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I completely agree. She's basically, that was my former main before Rose came out, and it took me, I think, a full year to get even remotely competent with her. And it was just, I was like, oh my gosh, like, this character's insane. It's when I joke about growing a third arm and a second brain,
I was gonna say,
kind of not joking.
I'm really glad you got rid of the third arm, because I mean, as effective as it was in helping you play this character, it looked goofy. I wasn't gonna say it then, but I think we're far enough removed from it now that I can tell you.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you for holding on to that for a while. So I'm going to bring up here this quadrant graphic: hard to play, easy to play, and then high tier and low tier. And if your character is easy to play and high tier, why would you not want that here? You know, why would you not want this basic structure? I think fighting games are more complex than this little, quadrant graphic I brought up. There's a sweet spot in here where if it's super easy to do in your high tier, everyone's going to do it, and that is the history of fighting games. That is what we've seen. We've seen it with Bayonetta and Smash 4. We've seen it with Cammy and Street Fighter 5. We've seen it in a number of games. Like, and if you're Capcom and your characters fall into this category here of high tier and easy to play, you failed. You have flat out failed at your job, because everyone's going to gravitate to those characters. Everyone's going to play those characters, and that's when you should know that you've messed up. And I just wanted to dialogue a little bit about that. And characters falling into the other categories of like, the No Man's Land of Rose and Oro, where they're very hard to play and then they're very low tier. That's also a No Man's Land you don't want your characters to fall into, but like the community tends to get more outraged over someone like Luke being super strong versus characters being super weak,
because that affects
characters
the
are super
whole
weak.
cast. That affects everyone that's playing the game that it runs into you. The ones that aren't good and are hard to play, that affects just that character for the most part.
Well said. So and so you can see characters that are going to fall all over the gamut here. Ignore that Cammy's double the size as everyone else, because that's coincidence.